Why can't I see myself?
What do you mean?
Oh, that's like magic. Magic. This afternoon's Dharma talk is titled Something Arises, Something's Afoot, Other Things Aren't. So something shows up in our life, in our mind, thinking about something, something comes through the door, we go through a door into something, some other things, something arises, things arise. This teaching is different places, but the reference for this would be the Lankavatara Sutra, which came out in somewhere in the early part of the last millennium, 3,000, 2 or 300 AD, after the Common Era. Anyway, something arises, and we name it. Something makes its appearance, and we name it. Appearance, hand. Sometimes those two get somewhat conflated or are mixed with each other. So we're just breaking it down so that we can more carefully study it as it occurs in our mind, our body, our sensorium, sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste, and so on, right up through sense of thinking. Anything that arises. It wasn't there, now it's here. And then it goes away, and then we still even track it down with more naming, more explanation. So something arises, we name it, and then we project onto it. We imagine things about it. Well, what happened is over there, it's not over here. That's never happened before. Well, here it comes again. So we have a constant, you could say, a chatter. Most of the world is doing this. Something happens, they give it a name, and then they make up stuff about it. Or they might be thinking they're actually describing it when they're imagining things, because they don't really understand the fundamental nature of something arises, we name it, and we explain it, or we establish it, or we justify it, or we condemn it. You know, you can come up with all the variations. There's countless numbers. So there's 2 more dharmas that come after this. This is the first 3. This is also can be studied in a little bit more conceptual, maybe not quite as accessible form, rather, in what's called the 3 modes, or dependent. Things are dependently arisen, and then they're what are the other 2?
Imaginary.
What's the other one?
Perfected.
Oh, good. I usually don't give tests. Only when I can't remember what I'm saying. So the dependently arisen, in other words, this causes this, very simple, dependent, interdependent. And then we make up stuff about that. We imagine something. This belongs to me, this belongs to you, this comes from a tree. No, it doesn't. This is actually made of plastic. You know, we could just on and on and on. We can go every which direction. They did a good job of imitating wood, though. So, and in those 3, then the perfected is the way the last 2 show up in the what I originally called the 5 Dharmas, which is the perfected, or ultimate truth, relative truth, ultimate truth. So the last 2, something arises, appears, we name it, we think of stuff about it, and then the last 2 are Buddha knowledge and suchness, or the understanding of it that shows up in a conceptual way, somewhat, or and it aligns itself with direct perception of reality, of the nature of reality. often called suchness, can be called shunyata, emptiness. Suchness is a good one. And I can say to you that your true nature has never left suchness. Who you really are, your fundamental nature, your Buddha nature, for talking out of this particular lineage, has never... Someone's hiding behind those two arrows. has never left that. Usually the consciousness that has never left that, because we were appearing, that is appearing as a physical organism, a human being, gets sucked into things arising, naming things, in order to get some kind of strategize around this, so we can, even in ancient times, so we can get food, so we can protect ourselves against much larger things that have big teeth and claws and are not human, or perhaps they're human too. Danger, and then we get acclimated, we get conditioned to protecting the physical form, and more we start actually feeling as a race of beings that what is real is this solid situation, and it has a reality, but it's dependently arisen. It's dependent on everything else for its apparent singularity. The singularity needs to be questioned. We are not all one. This is a misunderstanding. If people say that, this is what ego does with it. Well, we're all one. Nope. Not. It's wrong. So if we look at these concepts, and we bring, in our situation, as meditators, as people who are endeavoring to train their mind, if you begin to stretch, expand, emphasize the consciousness or the awareness or the openness in which things occur, in which those appearances show up, that we name and that we explain or accept or condemn or meddle with, whatever it may be. Or we squeeze in such a way that it starts to produce all kinds of appearances with dollar bills on them. Or success and failure, the 8 worldly dharmas of success and failure, and praise and blame, so on and so forth. It doesn't seem to be necessary to figure it out. It's not that you can't do some calculation, some figuring, and have some ability to look more deeply into the conceptual teaching that is there, that is endeavoring to build some kind of a conceptual support so you can continue to practice and look at your awareness. It's very difficult to trust something that is not there. Or give it the benefit of the doubt. And the way that I teach is because of my understanding, because of the training that I went through for a long period of time, the way it shows up for me is people should really their confusion should really be respected, because any one of you can't awaken, you can't awaken in the way the person next to you can awaken. The causes and conditions that arise as your obstacles are just like a completely different, it's a different card game altogether. It's just a different structure, because it's so very complicated. Because of all it's not just the way we like to think of cause and effect is this moves through space and hits this, and the effect is, we see this, there's visual, and then these two solid things come together, and we have sound. So we like that because we can track cause and effect. We do this in our court systems. Every now and then I bring this up because it's simpler. Who did it? Lock them up. Or who, in another situation, who who kicked the field goal, who got a PhD, who won the spelling bee. I mean, it's just on and on. Or who flunked, who didn't make it. Always evaluating based on cause, me, and my accomplishments, or you and your accomplishments, or failures. And when those happen, it isn't so, we're not saying so much about we don't see that that's happening, it's just that we add on to it, we load it up with more propaganda about what people should do, what they shouldn't do, what I should do. This is where this whole thing that your fathers have been telling you, probably, maybe not. You need to get an education. What are you doing living in a monastery? It's ridiculous. Sound familiar? Yeah. Probably didn't happen to you. But some version of that tends to happen with you can't hardly interact with anybody without having some kind of contradictory thing that has a relative right, a relative wrong, right, wrong, correct, incorrect, should be, shouldn't be. And this whole thing fans out in these first three dharmas. It's called a mundane path. It means that you can accomplish some things, you can fail at other things. We're not trying to get rid of that. We're just saying, let's really be aware of what that is. One of the ways, probably others, the only way I know of, is sit down and train your mind to see more clearly. It's a relative statement. Probably sounds rather mundane. But the way in which you're seeing is quite a bit different than the seeing that happens through just seeing what is successful, seeing what is a failure, seeing what shows up in those different ways. It's seeing it is seeing the fundamental nature of the separation of cause and effect, the fundamental nature of arising, naming, and explaining. It's seeing what is that fundamentally? Fundamentally, nothing happens at all. The happening part, that is an illusion. It's as the Tibetans say, the dream you have at night is the sample dream. This is the real dream. Waking up for the one you have at night is simple because you just wake up. But waking up from this dream, you might not get a glimpse of it until you die. And then when you die, of course, then the wheel starts over again because of all the accumulation of causes and conditions that you have let. When I say let, there's different ways of talking about the let part. Run your life. Fear will run your life. You can operate out of fear from now on for the rest of your life. That doesn't mean you're walking around looking like somebody who's afraid because you cover it up and you're not afraid because you have an idea, you have an agenda, you have a path, you have a philosophy, you have a belief, you have beliefs and disbeliefs, you have opinions. Oh, opinions are great. It's like living in the middle of 1,500 rowboats. You can't even see the water. All you see are boats. What a wonderful image that is. It helps so much, doesn't it? Especially all you Pisces. So it's a way of talking about it. And sometimes what I say seems confusing, sometimes maybe it's helpful. My intention is to help you, see more clearly who and what you are and why you're even in such a place like this, meaning the world, not just this room. Why or how did you actually come into manifestation? As I've said probably hundreds of times by now, since I've been talking hundreds of times, go look in the mirror. That's the simplest way to talk about dependent origination. You cannot be there without a mother and a father. We kind of take that for granted. And a particular one at a particular time. Otherwise, you would be someone else, more than likely. So something arises, we name it, and we project our ideas, opinions, and modify it with our interpretation of that. Very simple. If you can see that deeply and see how dependent origination shows up in that particular model, you will begin to see, depending on how you personally are wired, how your thinking process works, how your intuitive some people are very, very intuitive, extremely. They can't even explain what they understand. And some people are very, very conceptual, and they can't even understand what they've just explained. You know what I'm saying? Yeah? So the understanding sometimes is incredibly powerful, but people have no confidence in it because it's so unsupported. Yay. Nothing needs your support. You do not need any support. Who you are, everywhere I look, I see the Buddha. It doesn't mean that I'm so great because I can see the Buddha. It means I see the Buddha. Nothing needs fixing. If you're continually trying to repair or fix something, don't try to stop doing that. Just bring your awareness to it so you can see that you have an agenda about your identity, and that is a mistaken identity. There is no one home. The skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept of the thinking process, or the elaboration on what appeared process, and the six sense fields through which those situations appeared, the consciousness itself of sound, of smell, of taste, of touch, the object that is arising, lights, sounds, cardinals in the trees, and the organ that receives that, are not separate. They just look that way. If you realize that, the work is over. Never have to meditate again. Never have to do anything again. And you may not. You may not do anything again. If you're on this path, then maybe you'll look back at your vow to be with all things. This is the Bodhisattva vow. Save all beings. And of course, the fundamental understanding is there aren't any beings. They're not really a joke. But what is profound about it is that both there are beings who are suffering intensely everywhere, and those beings are completely empty of a self that suffers. It's an astonishing thing to see. And it's flat out ordinary. At the same time, again, another, what do they call that? Non-duality? Not two. One taste. Roching. One taste. I always like to use Tibetan every now and then. It kind of brings up the... I'm about to use some French. No, I'm not going to try my French. Not with Evan in the room. And not with Mayun watching us from Brittany. I'll work on it for a few more years. Questions, please?
What's the fifth one? You said Buddha wisdom was the fourth, and what's the fifth?
Thanks. I didn't mention that one. Suchness. So things appear, I'll go through it again, and there's different ways of talking about this in the Lankavatara Sutra, whether it's the Red Pine translation or the Daisetsu Suzuki translation, I think I have his name right, which was written in the 1930s. A different way of understanding that. I highly recommend Red Pine. You could look at both of them. We've studied the Lankavatara, I think, as a study group in here over the years 4 different times. We're in the 4th time right now. Yes. So we keep going through this material so that people can use these concepts, can get used to these concepts, and then also spend a lot of time on the cushion watching their minds. So things appear, things arise, we name them, we make up stuff about them, and then through the sitting practice of meditation we start to look at that structure, and we begin to see either right away or gradually or over time, however that may show up for you depending on the causes and conditions that arise as your particular human being manifestation. There's so many causes and conditions you can't trace them all in that area, and then you would be able to see reality. You would actually be seeing from some place that is both here and not here at the same time. Everybody's already in nirvana. You've heard of nirvana, right? Right. Nirvana. It isn't something else. It's not separate from this. It's broken down so that the Buddha could teach, so that this can be taught. So the way I talk about this is the Buddha knowledge part is more of a conceptual understanding of it. But it's not a level of just knowing a bunch of facts or a bunch of logic about it. It's also having insight. It is coupled with suchness. Some people maybe have more of one, like I was saying before. Some people have this powerful intuition without being able to actually know what it is they understand and be able to talk about Buddha knowledge. Sometimes some people will have this intuition really early, and it might be decades before they're able to actually say what they talk about, because every time they go towards that intuition, they freak out, because the ego mind is there's still aspects of the ego mind that are thought to be real. You don't have to get rid of something that is not real. Isn't that good? The ego that you constantly thought, well, that's just my ego. Well, that's very egotistical of her. Notice how we do this. We are so easy for us to just say, well, that's as if we've made some big discovery about ourselves or somebody else. That will not help you to make comments that are relatively true about your ego. That's narcissistic or that's egotistical. Of course it is. It's everywhere. So now that we see that, now let's find out what is true. And I can tell you what is true. It is not real. But we make it real by when someone has an egotistical, so to speak, or narcissistic activity, we condemn it, makes it real. We justify it, makes it real. We turn away and ignore it. We can't stand it anymore, so I'm just going to walk away from it. Gives it its relative force, reality, and so on. Find out who you are. If you find out who you are, no one will be a puzzle to you anymore. If you make friends with this, you have no enemies anywhere. You can't have an enemy if you make friends with this. Because the enemy always is projected out of this onto the world. This antagonism here is pushed away, out, and then we think it's out there, and then we fight with them. Or the difficulty is out there, we think it is here. We need some kind of polarity going on. Knock it off. Don't do that. How do you do that? That's not rhetorical. How do you do that? Huh?
Sit more.
Sit still.
Yeah, good. I like to hear that come back this way. Meditate. Sit down, and don't add, don't subtract, don't divide, don't do any math. I'll sit down and what? Be miserable. Pretty simple, isn't it? Need any instructions on that? In other words, if you hold very still and do nothing, then the very thing you've been trying to avoid through your jiggling around and moving and it shows right up. It's right there. And you don't have to accept it. Misunderstanding. Don't reject it. Don't accept anything. Don't let go of anything. That's a misunderstanding, where somebody's trying to manipulate you into being different than you are. Be who you are. Hang on. But look at the grip. Look where you're gripping at. Use that. That's a Dharma gate. Look at the way in which you torture yourself. Look at the way in which you do this. If you're blaming something else for the suffering, just watch that. Watch it. If you watch something and you don't add to it, if you watch something and don't subtract from it, and you watch something and you don't divide or separate yourself from it, then the very teaching of I would say the three marks of existence, impermanence, then it can actually function. Then your horrible feelings actually can start to fade away, because they depend on your grasping or rejecting or ignoring in order to have any kind of longevity, duration, and they will get it if you do anything with it. Because when you do that, you're doing it out of an imputed self-centeredness, which is commonly called ego. In the Yogacara tradition, we call it the seventh consciousness, the one just past the generic thinking mind of the sixth consciousness that is actually freaked out, paranoid, looking for stuff, keeping things away, getting more things in, ignoring things that are impossible to understand or might make you look bad if you did anything with them, because then everyone would know how unskilled you are.
Is trying to relate to our negativity doing too much with it?
Say more about what you mean by trying to relate to our negativity.
Trying to, I guess, to sit down and feel miserable, there seems to be a subtle wanting that to resolve itself or get better.
When I say that, all I'm saying is, whatever. Just this is why it's so necessary to just do the. That's why we have forms. This I don't believe this. I don't believe in this. That there's. I don't believe in that. But we need some kind of a structure, and there's the Kagyu refuge tree there, the Tanka there, Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. It's not about believing in it, but it's about using forms in order to help us work with the incredible convoluted nature of our consciousness and our karma down through the centuries, through lifetime after lifetime. So what you're doing is you come in, you sit down, go through whatever forms are here, but the main form is you sit down, hold still, and you observe. It's an awareness practice. And a lot of the awareness is about seeing the way in which you keep rejecting, or the way in which you keep stirring things up, or keep analyzing, or adding on. Just watch that. Don't interfere with it. Don't try to stop it, fluff it up, tamp it down. Do no manipulating, no meddling with your mind at all. Just be there. More?
Do we have to approach the spiritual path in a mundane way?
Well, yeah, you have to get your butt in here and sit on the cushion. You have to give the teacher money. You have to use the teaching person, in this case, has worked with the Sangha in order to do this. This is not something you can particularly just import from Tibet or Japan. I mean, you could, and there are people who have already done that. But to actually have this work as you could call it a hybrid, you have to be you do it very slowly and watch how things work so that you get an understanding of the causes and conditions that are arising in any cultural context as different kinds of karma, human beings, and so on, and see how could you present these teachings in such a way that the forms are there, but they're not there as fundamental things to believe in, but they're there as opportunities for people with the intelligence, with the openness to see, to understand that forms are empty of anything you add to them or any way you interpret them. Whatever appears is empty of the name. It's empty of the evaluation, determination, analysis of it. It's empty of that. So that's where you actually begin to see the last two dharmas, Buddha knowledge and suchness or emptiness or ultimate truth. You can't actually see something that you're not separate from. So I don't know if you could say you see ultimate truth. That might be too fancy. More?
What would the difference be between the spiritual path and the mundane approach?
Well, it could be, simply put, it's just that the spiritual path is trying to understand what this is in all of its, in the consciousness, the manifestation, thought forms, emotions, memories, reactions to this and that, and the way that's to try to see deeply what it is. Whereas the mundane path imputes a self who is not doing so well and needs to get better, needs to improve. So the mundane path would be, and those will work to some extent. And some people, that's all they can do. I mean, they're not ready for a spiritual path. Maybe 3 lifetimes from now, maybe 15 lifetimes. And I don't mean this to be funny. I'm saying we really have to respect a person's confusion. Some people are ready for this and some people are not. Don't ever sell meditation to anybody. Buddhism. No promotion. If people come and ask you, then respond. But make them drag it out of you. So that they have So their karma, the deep interstices of not out of their fear, not out of their hope, but out of their heart, and they're not expecting you to somehow fluff them up all the time and support them. More?
How is the way that we're seeking the truth different than like a scientific or a Western approach to that?
It's pretty scientific. So not taking anything for granted. Not, it's not particularly jumping to conclusions about anything. Conclusions are extra. You don't need conclusions. We don't need to conclude anything. Why conclude? Unless you want something. You want something else. And this doesn't mean that you won't, in your daily life, that you won't have a wish or a desire for something else. But it's not the same as thinking there's somebody that deserves something or somebody that doesn't deserve something, some kind of imputation that makes that even more deeply ingrained emotionally and causes more fear or more trepidation or more worrying. Very simple. You want the idea of wanting food. I mean, there's a physical form here. You're going to want to eat. You're going to want to take a nap. The Zen tradition says it in several different ways. One of the famous ones is before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Function. It's just that before there's someone who's functioning, so someone who's carrying wood and chopping water. It's not that funny. No? Oh, it is funny. And after enlightenment or awakening or realization, that's just happening. There's no one who's doing that. I'm not saying there isn't a consciousness that's aware of the wood or aware of the water. I'm not saying that there isn't a consciousness, but it's no longer separated from anything. Therefore, it is the wood. It is the water. It's not separated from. It's not separated from anyone it meets. Everyone that awareness, which still may be embodied and may not. It's not going to care whether it's embodied or not, particularly, because the grasping, the rejecting the hope and fear is gone. It's completely hopeless. Therefore, it's completely fearless. If you have hope, you're going to suffer. I'm not saying we don't look out and say, gee, I hope it doesn't snow today. I'm not talking about that. You should always say that, especially in Michigan. Get a quorum going. Further questions? Here.
Earlier you pointed at the Buddha and the Tonka over there and you said, I don't believe that. But then you, shortly after that said...
Well, you're rubbing your knee.
I don't know.
Do you believe your knee hurts?
It does, actually.
Okay. I rest my case. What do you want to ask me?
So you pointed at the Buddha and the Tonka and you said, I don't believe that.
Yes.
And then right after that you said something about several lifetimes.
Yes.
So do you believe in lifetimes, plural?
No. What are you snickering about? No, I don't. I don't believe them.
But you say that often to motivate people to listen or to listen to what you're saying. You say,
How do you know what I'm doing?
well, maybe you're not, but you say it a lot in the context.
You think
of
I'm
your
trying to
teaching.
manipulate people and get them to listen to me?
I don't know. Whatever it takes, I suppose.
Huh?
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes?
Or whatever it gives.
You're getting more and more clever all the time. Go ahead.
You often,
Finish
you
your
often
question.
use the metaphor or the statement of many lifetimes. It
I
might
do.
take you so many lifetimes.
Yes, I do.
So how can we be supported with that, by that, without believing it? It seems like a stretch.
Oh, the stretch is your issue, not the belief or disbelief. It's very easy to neither believe nor disbelieve. It's just the example that I can give that's fairly simple is that I give all the time. the pile of lavender mushrooms that are stored on the roof. Are they there? Can everybody see those in your mind? Can you see? Can't see. How about green ones? Yeah, those are easier. So is that there or not there? Is it real or not real? Is the nightmare you had 3 nights ago, 8 nights ago, 15 days ago, that you woke up in a sweat, which maybe you didn't have it then, but you have them, we have them, was that real or unreal? You had the experience, so it has a reality to it, but fundamentally it's not real. Lifetimes are like that. There are no lifetimes. There's not, even this lifetime is suspect. And why? Because there's no actual solid one here. Go ahead.
So why do you think it's helpful to say lifetimes?
Probably not helpful. It seems to be causing you a headache. What is your basic question? I'm at the basic one.
On a relative level, you don't know what happens after you're dead.
You're telling me stuff. You're not asking me questions. This is not a conversation.
How can you?
I'm a teacher. You're a student. Or did you? Why did you shoot the shit with me?
No.
Come ahead. Come ahead and put your place whatever it is you're trying to ask me about on the line and question me about it.
The birth and death of one moment to the next in this relative lifetime from
Yes.
relative my birth till death.
Yes.
To,
What about it?
To say that there are multiple lifetimes, what's different about believing that or believing in a God?
Believing in, I didn't say I believe that. There's no other way to talk about it. Well, I'm not saying there isn't, but I don't know of another way to talk about the discontinuity of identity that is appearing over here, and is actually appearing to you too, but you may cover it up. But it's discontinuity, and the way of talking about it is different lifetimes. But as Trungpa Rinpoche once said, this was very helpful to me when I heard it, not right away, but after contemplating it for a while. Someone asked him when His Holiness the 17th Karmapa passed away, the 16th Karmapa, excuse me, Your Holiness, I didn't mean to kill you so soon. The 16th Karmapa passed away in 1981 near Chicago, and someone was asking not too long after that, I think, around that time, I don't know, circa 1981 or 82 maybe. So asking about reincarnation, and she was specifically asking, as I recall, about, well, His Holiness, this is someone who knew His Holiness, Rangchung Rigpe Dorje, the 16th Karmapa, and may have even been a student of his, I don't know, but someone who knew him, say, well, His Holiness died. Now, is His Holiness, I think speaking of like his personality, is he going to actually show up in another lifetime? Is this be the 17th? Which, of course, there is a 17th Karmapa now. And I have to paraphrase a little bit, but I'm pretty close to what Rinpoche said. He said, you and the 16th Karmapa you could both come together, and you could be you. Pointing to her, you could be the 17th Karmapa. And so I think that was probably fairly confusing. You remember hearing that, Robert?
No, but I know that that's called a blessed toku.
Yeah.
And that he's taught on that quite a bit. That's one of the ways that it works.
Yes. So there's no separate beings. It's an illusion. Even the people who seem to know about this are tulkus, like Trungpa Rinpoche, or there's a few of them that don't seem to know that, but or Tralig Rinpoche, whom Shannon, you met Tralig Rinpoche, who's now passed away. So that whole area looks, our body form, being born and being here and living for a certain time and then going back into the elements or into the fire or wherever it may be, it looks like an actual lifetime, but not exactly. It's not exactly that. Who you actually are is not even, is neither here nor is it absent from this. You're coming and going. That whole area is just coming and going all the time. This is like His Holiness the 16th on his just before his parinirvana, or when he was dying, said nothing happens. Now, but students of his or people around him, because of his way of teaching, when if anyone else were to say that, they might say, well, what the hell does that mean? And drop it. Because of the force of his teaching, that caught people, and caught the people to the point that they made bumper stickers out of it. That was quite interesting to see. Nothing happens, bumper sticker. What? Nothing happens. So what's being said, what's being pointed out there is what you actually are doesn't occur. It's not a time and space affair. It's just this. A Buddha nature. Suchness. Doesn't move. There's no three kinds of suchness. There isn't suchness coming and going. There's suchness that is covered up by delusion, by imaginary, by hope and fear. Yes, Junchu.
Does consciousness have a personality?
Consciousness itself may not have a personality, but the way in which you're asking it could manifest as just about anything. And when consciousness is liberated from the chains of belief and the chains of hope and fear, then consciousness, if it's functioning with an organism, a body-mind complex as a human being, then it's actually free to do just about anything. So it could show up in any direction, fearless to the point of not being threatened by anything, and still having a tone of voice, having a smile, having a frown. Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. Someone who realizes this is no longer, you can't even find them. They could be sweeping the street. They could be fixing the street lights.
If someone sees that the ego is unreal, where does the personality come from?
It's still there. It's just unreal. So it can't be threatened. It doesn't have any. There's no substance to it. So it's just like probably not a very good metaphor, but it's the one that's showing up, just like a flower. It just shows up, and then it falls apart again. It blooms and it goes away like a morning glory. But when it's blooming, it's totally apparent, and then it just goes away. It's called impermanence. Go ahead.
Could the personality of someone drastically change if they see that it's unreal?
It could. There's no way to predict anything in that area, particularly. Yes, please.
A different question.
Yeah.
If we see that we are projecting our own negativity onto someone else or other people in
Mhm.
general, do we need to have some separation or space in order to see that it's not being caused by that person?
You might. You start to have a suspicion that something you're doing is invented. You're inventing something. You're actually missing. There's just a sense that you're doing it. It's called prajna. The wisdom that sees through the duality that the ego, the hope and fear mind sets up as being success and failure. You're starting to see through that. Prajna tends to move from a kind of a relative, like the prajna of seeing it, feeling it, knowing that fire is hot, water is wet, ground is hard, wind moves, and it's a very simple kind of insight that is just very basic to the different ways that material world shows up. And then it starts to get more complicated.
Does that, would we see something in the space, or giving ourselves space from that person, would we be able to see something different than if we were constantly around them and still trying to see that we're projecting onto them?
It's quite variable in that area. So, and when I say depends, it really does. It depends. That you know, that's not a determination that I would necessarily make. I would, as a Dharma teacher, I might help someone who was working with that, support them looking more deeply into it. But it would be unlikely for me to tell them what to do. You already know this to some extent. More further questions? Could have a couple more if you have them. Shannon?
If we're dealing with intense emotions, is there a way to kind of slow a process down so we don't then have to jump into labeling the emotion or creating thoughts around it?
So, of course, sitting meditation gives us more room for the crap to happen, and more space, and there's more of a chance of the consciousness is identifying with the spaciousness of the mind rather than the actual items that are showing up, emotions, feelings, memories, concepts, constructs of all kinds coming and going and jockeying for position in our thinking process. But more space, so that there's a possibility that our Buddha nature, our wisdom mind, will begin to understand that. And so one of the ways that I, besides sitting practice and encouraging people to sit as much as they can, I also encourage people to do that, the alternating sense awareness practice. So taking a sense of touch, a sense of seeing, sense of hearing, which are very powerful, the objects, and they're the feeling and the colors, textures of something, shape of something, and the sound, the tone, and the spaces between the tones, whatever it may be, a bird or a person's voice, to alternate, to go into it and just touch on it and then go to the next one. Touch on it and go to the next, just go back and forth or around. And this, by doing this, it seems that whatever's arising as fear or paranoia or, for that matter, terror, anxiety or whatever's arising, is going to have company. Because those are not that those aren't happening in the body, in the feeling of the body, but the sense of seeing. If you're just seeing the shape of a building or some green leaves on a plant or the shape of a hexagonal shape of a table, just a vision of that before you call it a hexagon, just a feeling of that is there if you move immediately from that to another form. Even another sense field, and treat the thought process the same way you're treating sound. Just receive. So if you're practicing on things that are less threatening, like color, red, blue, orange, rainbows. See. I mean, can everybody, if I say I'm going to count to 3, and then I want you to see a rainbow in your mind. 1, 2, 3. See that? Anyone can't see a rainbow in their mind? Come on, tell me. You can't see it. I promise not to pick on you. Okay, everybody saw a rainbow. What was the top color? There's not going to be a test. But what was the top color?
Blue, purple, red.
Red. Actually, it's purple. No, it could be any direction. You know, those are just colors. It doesn't have to be the, approved rainbow by the state of Michigan. But it's amazing how much. Look at how incredibly productive that the imagination is. Use it. I mean, actually use that to help stabilize you. You don't have to go default into whatever kind of paranoia that's happening, it's coming, has you by the throat or something. You don't have to default into that. But don't fight with it, don't exclude it, but don't default into it. There's like the comment that quite often happens is, here I go again. Here it comes again. You know, it's just, I'm so tired of this. There must be some way I can get rid of this. Stop trying to get rid of anything, not to get rid of anything. Include, yes.
So you said don't get rid of anything, but use your imagination.
Mhm.
So if you're, want to get,
This better be really easy.
if you don't want to feel something or think something, should you invent a rainbow?
There isn't any other kind of rainbow. You think there's actual rainbows that aren't invented?
Should you endeavor to replace
That's
the,
not you didn't answer my question.
what was your question?
I don't remember. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah, I was trying to clarify your question. What sign are
Should
you?
you, huh?
What sign are you?
You know.
Go ahead.
Should your endeavor to use imagination to replace what it is that you don't want to look at?
I think Evan's doing that, aren't you, Evan? Huh? Taking something and replacing it with something else?
Yeah.
We talked about that earlier. If you're a life coach, that's okay. Really, I mean, not a joke. It's okay. Some people are ready to do this in a more or less reference point, less stable way. Usually because they're terrified by something or really heavy anxiety. Not a good idea to replace that with something else, particularly. As a meditator, as a person working on this path, not a good idea to particularly try to get rid of anything. More?
If something is really intense and it keeps coming and coming and coming,
Mm-hmm.
and you could kind of nudge it with a diversion, like
Mhm.
a rainbow or something.
Like a rainbow.
Well, I probably wouldn't pick a rainbow, but
You wouldn't pick a rainbow? What would you pick?
my scamp.
Your house trailer?
Yeah, like all the things I could do with it.
Yeah. I remember one time I was in retreat, and I was really miserable. And it was like really long, month-long retreat. And I just got sick of being there, so I started imagining creating a storage building. And I created a whole storage building, board by board. And then I went back to being bored. So I think to be definite about this, I would say it doesn't matter so much what you do, it's about really being aware of what you're doing, rather than validating something and then blanking out in some area or ignoring something. Just, if you're going to do something, bring as much awareness into it as you can, or be as aware as you can of what it is that's occurring, what's happening. Be the sky, not the clouds. Identify with the open dimension of the situation rather than the clouds which show up. If you do that, then you will not be separate from the clouds. No guarantee, yes.
So, using that image of being the
Yes.
open dimension, say, and you say step back a quarter of an inch, but if you know that your mind is perseverating on something over and over and over, does that ever just strengthen itself? Where, you say exercise is the awareness muscle, but it could be the muscle of the same old story.
Not if you're aware of it. If you're aware that you're doing that, it's different than having that happen just where it slowly fades off in the background and it just keeps happening and happening and happening. Habit patterns. If you're aware of habit patterns, they aren't exactly habit patterns, but they can be very painful to watch, to observe without meddling with it. As I sometimes say to people, whatever's arising in your life right now, whether you're on the cushion or you're out in your scamp, is exactly what you need to see. But for you to actually see that, not fight with anything anymore, just, as I quoted him before, this is one of the most profound things that Chief Joseph of the Nezpers said, from where the sun stands now, I will fight no more forever. Don't fight with anything. It's not good. Don't fight with anything, no matter how mean, aggressive, brutal, or threatening. Don't fight. Don't run away either. Sit a lot. Kyun. Thought I forgot you. You forgot your question.
Yeah. The origin of what you say something arises, the origin of the something that arises, is that always karma?
It looks that way. We don't know. We go too far trying to explain, and it just creates a big philosophical labyrinth. It looks like karma, cause and effect. It looks like this happens and then happens and this happens, and here we are. Your mom and your dad got together, and then here you are. Just keeps going on and on and on. Okay. More? Ask me the actual question. Did I say ask me? Sorry. Ask me.
I don't know the actual question.
Okay. Any final questions before we close? Okay, thank you very much.